I thought my wedding day would be perfect. After 5 years of raising my daughter Ivy alone, I'd finally found someone who loved us both unconditionally. Michael Thompson wasn't just marrying me. He was choosing to be Ivy's father, something her biological dad never truly was. But as I stood at the altar in my carefully chosen ivory dress, watching my future mother-in-law's stone-cold expression, I had no idea that in a few minutes, an 8-year-old girl would become the hero of our story. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I became a single mom when Ivy was just 3 years old. Her father, David, decided that fatherhood was too much responsibility and walked out on us without looking back. Those early years were brutal, working double shifts as a registered nurse while trying to be everything Ivy needed. I'd collapse into bed each night wondering if I was enough, if she'd grow up feeling the absence of that missing parent. Everything changed 2 years ago when I met Michael at my friend Jessica's birthday party. I almost didn't go. Finding a babysitter was expensive, and honestly, I'd gotten comfortable in my little bubble with Ivy. But Jessica practically dragged me out, insisting I needed adult interaction that didn't involve medical charts. Michael was different from the start. When I mentioned I had a daughter, he didn't get that glazed look most guys got. You know, the one that screams too much baggage. Instead, his eyes lit up. "I'd love to meet her," he said, and I could tell he meant it. Their first meeting was at a park. I was nervous, watching from a bench as Michael approached the swings where Ivy was playing. She was shy at first, but within minutes, he had her giggling as he pushed her higher and higher. "You're not trying to steal my mommy, are you?" she asked with that brutal honesty only kids possess. Michael crouched down to her eye level and said, "Actually, I was hoping both of you might want to be my family." That's when I knew he was special. The next 18 months were the happiest of my life. Michael never treated Ivy like she was mine, and he was just tolerating her. He went to her school plays, helped with homework, and even learned to braid her hair better than I could. When he proposed last Christmas morning, he got down on one knee twice, once for me, and once for Ivy, asking if she'd let him be her dad. But there was one massive problem: Margaret Thompson. Michael's mother had very specific ideas about what her son's life should look like, and a single mom nurse with a 7-year-old daughter wasn't part of that vision. From our first meeting, Margaret made her disapproval crystal clear without ever saying anything directly confrontational. "Oh, you're a nurse?" she'd said at that first dinner, her tone suggesting I'd just told her I collected garbage for a living. "How practical." Then she'd turned to Michael with a bright smile. "You know, Emma Watson, Dr. Watson's daughter, just finished her cardiology fellowship. Such an accomplished young woman, and she's always asking about you." The comments never stopped. Margaret had mastered the art of the backhanded compliment and the loaded question. "It must be so hard, starting over at your age," she'd say with fake sympathy. "I mean, most women your age are just beginning their families, not dealing with complications." She never said Ivy's name if she could help it. My daughter was always the child or Sarah's daughter, never Michael's stepdaughter, never part of the family Margaret was supposedly welcoming. During holiday gatherings, Margaret would make elaborate plans that somehow never included child-friendly activities. "Oh, we're going to the wine tasting at the country club," she'd announce. "I suppose you'll need to make other arrangements." Michael tried to smooth things over, caught between the woman he loved and the mother who'd raised him. "She just needs time," he'd say after particularly painful encounters. "This is all new to her." But I could see the strain in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when his mother made her pointed comments about genetic legacy and fresh starts. What broke my heart most was watching Ivy try to win Margaret's approval. My brilliant, funny, kind daughter would bring carefully made drawings to family gatherings, only to have Margaret glance at them briefly and set them aside. Ivy would offer to help in the kitchen and be told, "That's not necessary, dear." She started asking me why Grandma Margaret didn't seem to like her, and I had to find age-appropriate ways to explain that some adults have trouble with change. The worst incident happened 3 months before our wedding. We were at Michael's birthday dinner when Margaret stood up to make a toast. "To my wonderful son," she began, "who has such a generous heart, sometimes too generous." Her eyes landed on me. I just hope he remembers that charity begins at home, but it shouldn't end there. The table went silent. Michael's face turned red, and I felt heat creeping up my neck. But before either of us could respond, 8-year-old Ivy stood up on her chair and said, "Daddy Mike says love isn't charity. He says love is choosing your family every day." Then she looked directly at Margaret and added, "He chose us, and we chose him back." Margaret's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. That night, Michael was quiet during the drive home, and I knew we were heading for a reckoning. 3 weeks before the wedding, Michael pulled me aside after another tense family dinner. "I need to tell you something," he said, running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was stressed. "I love my mother, but I won't let her destroy our happiness. If she can't accept you and Ivy as family, then she's choosing not to be part of ours." That conversation led to Michael setting firm boundaries with Margaret for the first time in his 30 years of life. He told her that any future comments about our situation would result in immediate consequences. Her invitation to our wedding came with conditions. She would be respectful, supportive, or she would be asked to leave. Margaret's response was to book a suite at the most expensive hotel in town and invite half the Thompson family extended relatives to celebrate Michael's last night of freedom with a party we weren't invited to. The message was clear. She was drawing battle lines, but Michael was drawing his own lines too. 3 days before the wedding, I found him in his office, writing something by hand, not typing, actually writing with a pen on Thompson family letterhead. When I asked what it was, he sealed it in an envelope and handed it to Ivy. "Sweetheart," he said, kneeling down to her level, "this is very important. If Grandma Margaret says anything mean to Mommy at our wedding, anything that makes Mommy sad, I want you to take this letter and ask someone to help you read it out loud, okay?" Ivy nodded solemnly, clutching the envelope like it contained state secrets. "What does it say, Daddy Mike?" "It says what I should have said a long time ago," he replied, kissing her forehead. "But sometimes grown-ups need a little girl to help them be brave." The morning of our wedding dawned absolutely perfect. Clear skies, gentle breeze, the kind of October day that makes you believe in happy endings. I woke up in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house, where I'd stayed the night before, following tradition. Ivy bounced into my room at 7 a.m., already dressed in her flower girl outfit, a pale pink dress that made her look like a tiny princess. "Today's the day, Mommy," she squealed, climbing into bed with me. "Today, Daddy Mike becomes my real daddy." My heart swelled. Michael had been talking to Ivy about adoption, explaining that they could make their father-daughter relationship official in the eyes of the law. She'd been practicing signing her new name, Ivy Martinez Thompson. By 9 a.m., our house was buzzing with activity. My mom was directing the arrival of flowers, my sister was setting up the photography equipment, and my dad was pacing nervously in his tuxedo, practicing his father of the bride speech. Everything felt magical and right. Then Margaret arrived. She swept into our house like a storm cloud, dressed in a severe black dress that looked more appropriate for a funeral than a wedding. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, though she clearly didn't care if she was. Her eyes swept over the controlled chaos of wedding preparation with obvious disapproval. "Of course not," my mom said graciously, though I could hear the tension in her voice. "We're just putting the finishing touches on everything." Margaret's gaze landed on my wedding dress hanging in the living room, a simple but elegant A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves. "How interesting," she said. I would have expected something more traditional for a Thompson wedding, more formal. The criticism stung, especially since Michael and I had chosen the dress together. He'd said I looked like a fairy tale princess, that it was perfect for our outdoor garden ceremony, but Margaret's tone suggested I'd shown up in a potato sack. "It's exactly what Sarah wanted," my sister Emma jumped in, her voice sharp. "And Michael loves it." "I'm sure he does," Margaret replied smoothly. "Michael has always been easily pleased. Sometimes that's a wonderful quality, and sometimes—" She let the sentence hang, the implication clear. The morning continued with Margaret finding fault in everything, The flowers were too casual, the music selections were unconventional, and the outdoor venue was risky given the weather. Each comment was delivered with a smile, but they were death by 1,000 cuts. The worst moment came when she saw Ivy in her flower girl dress. My daughter had been so excited about this dress, had practiced her walk down the aisle dozens of times. But when she twirled to show Margaret, asking, "Don't I look pretty, Grandma?" Margaret's response was devastating. "You look very nice, dear," she said without warmth. "Though I do hope you understand that today is about your mother and Michael. It's important that children don't overshadow the bride and groom." Ivy's face fell. At 8 years old, she didn't understand the subtext, but she understood the tone. She was being told to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less important. I saw her shoulders slump, and something fierce and protective roared to life in my chest. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite my anger, "Ivy is a huge part of today. This isn't just about Michael and me. It's about us becoming a family. All three of us." Margaret's smile tightened. "Of course. How modern." By the time we arrived at the venue, my nerves were frayed. The garden looked absolutely magical. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an archway covered in climbing roses, fairy lights strung through the trees. It should have been everything I'd dreamed of, but Margaret's presence cast a shadow over everything. Michael was waiting at the altar, devastatingly handsome in his navy suit, his face lighting up when he saw us arrive. But I noticed how his expression shifted when he spotted his mother in the front row, her arms crossed and her mouth set in a thin line. The ceremony began beautifully. Ivy walked down the aisle scattering rose petals, every inch the perfect flower girl, despite Margaret's attempts to diminish her importance. My dad walked me down the aisle, tears in his eyes, and when Michael took my hand, everything else faded away. We'd written our own vows, and Michael's words were everything I'd dreamed of hearing. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden, "you taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. Every day I choose you. And Ivy, I choose to be your dad, not because I have to, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd, except for Margaret's. She sat stone-faced, staring straight ahead as if she were attending a business meeting rather than her son's wedding. When the officiant reached the traditional moment, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace," the garden fell silent. It was supposed to be a formality, a quaint tradition that no one ever actually interrupted. That's when Margaret stood up. 200 guests turned to stare as Michael's mother rose from her seat in the front row. The color drained from Michael's face, and I felt my knees go weak. This couldn't be happening. This was not happening at my wedding. "I object," Margaret said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent garden. "My son deserves a real woman, not a single mom with baggage." The collective gasp from our guests was audible. I heard my mother make a small, wounded sound behind me. Cell phones appeared as people started recording, capturing what was quickly becoming the most humiliating moment of my life. I tried to smile, tried to hold on to some shred of dignity as 200 people stared at me. The single mom with baggage, the woman who apparently wasn't good enough for the Thompson family name. Michael stood frozen beside me, his mouth open in shock, torn between defending his bride and confronting his mother. That's when I saw her, little Ivy, clutching the envelope Michael had given her 3 days earlier. My 8-year-old daughter who had just watched someone publicly humiliate her mother on what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. But instead of crying, instead of running away, Ivy Martinez did something that would change everything. She walked calmly toward the altar, her flower girl dress rustling softly, the sealed envelope held firmly in her small hands. Every eye in the garden followed her movement, the silence so complete you could hear the breeze rustling through the trees. "Excuse me," she said politely when she reached the microphone stand. The officiant looked confused but stepped aside as this tiny girl adjusted the microphone to her height. "Daddy told me to read this if Grandma said anything mean to Mommy." Ivy announced, her voice clear and steady. Her small fingers worked at the envelope's seal as 200 wedding guests held their collective breath. Margaret's face went white as she realized what was about to happen. Michael's expression shifted from shock to something that looked like pride mixed with anticipation. And I stood there, my heart pounding, about to discover what my future husband had known might be necessary all along. Ivy's small fingers carefully unfolded the letter, and in that moment, the entire garden seemed to hold its breath. My 8-year-old daughter stood at the microphone with the poise of someone 3 times her age, her flower girl dress catching the afternoon sunlight. Margaret had gone pale, finally understanding that her son had anticipated this exact scenario. "Dear Mom," Ivy began, reading Michael's handwritten words with careful pronunciation. "If you're hearing this letter, it means you just proved exactly why I needed to write it." The crowd was utterly silent. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Michael's jaw was set, his eyes fixed on his mother's increasingly horrified expression. I could see relatives and friends leaning forward in their chairs, phones still recording what was unfolding. Ivy continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You taught me to be a man of honor, so I'm going to honor my family today. My real family. Sarah is not baggage, Mom. She's the woman who taught me what real love looks like. She showed me that love isn't about taking the easy path. It's about choosing someone every single day, even when things get hard." Margaret tried to interrupt, raising her hand as if to stop the reading, but the crowd's energy had shifted completely. People were no longer looking at her with sympathy or confusion. They were looking at her with disapproval, some shaking their heads openly. "Ivy is not a burden or a complication," my daughter read on, her voice carrying Michael's words across the garden with perfect clarity. "She's the daughter I chose, just like Sarah chose me. When I look at this little girl, I don't see someone else's mistake. I see my future, my legacy, my family." Tears were streaming down my face now, but they weren't tears of humiliation anymore. They were tears of overwhelming love and gratitude for the man I was marrying, who had known his mother well enough to prepare for this moment. Ivy took a small breath and continued. "You raised me to believe that family means standing by each other, protecting each other, and lifting each other up. That's exactly what I'm doing today. I'm protecting my wife and my daughter from someone who claims to love me but can't accept the people who make me happy." The garden was so quiet I could hear Margaret's sharp intake of breath. Several guests in the back rows had started whispering among themselves, and I caught fragments. "Can't believe she said that," and "Poor Sarah," and "That little girl is so brave." "If you're hearing this letter," Ivy read, her voice becoming more confident as she sensed the crowd's support, "it means you chose your pride over your son's happiness. You chose your image of what my life should look like over the reality of what actually makes me whole. And that tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." Michael stepped closer to Ivy, placing a protective hand on her shoulder as she neared the end of the letter. Margaret was now visibly shaking, her carefully composed mask finally slipping to reveal the shock and growing panic underneath. "I hope someday you'll understand that Sarah and Ivy didn't take your son away from you. You pushed me away from you. But today, I'm making a choice. I'm choosing love over fear, acceptance over judgment, and my real family over your approval. Sarah Martinez is about to become Sarah Thompson, and Ivy Martinez is about to become my daughter in every way that matters. And if you can't celebrate that with us, then you're not welcome at our celebration." Ivy looked up from the letter, then directly at Margaret. With the innocent honesty that only children possess, she added, "Daddy says that's what boundaries look like, Grandma, and that it's okay to have them, even with family." The silence that followed lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, from somewhere in the middle section of guests, someone started clapping, slowly, deliberately. The applause spread like wildfire until the entire garden erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. Margaret stood frozen in the front row as 200 people applauded the 8-year-old girl who had just delivered the most powerful speech of the day. Some guests were wiping their eyes, others were nodding approvingly, and more than a few were looking at Margaret with barely concealed disgust. "That," said our officiant, recovering his composure with a warm smile, "is what I call a family that knows how to protect each other." He gestured to Margaret, whose face had gone through several shades of red and was now settling on a sickly pale green. "Ma'am, I believe your son has made his position quite clear. You're welcome to stay if you can be respectful, or you're welcome to leave if you cannot." Margaret looked around the garden, taking in the sea of disapproving faces. Michael's own relatives, his aunts, uncles, and cousins, were staring at her with expressions ranging from embarrassment to outright anger. His Uncle Robert, whom Margaret had always considered an ally, was shaking his head in obvious disgust. "Margaret," called out Michael's Aunt Linda from the third row, "I think you've done enough damage for one day." "This is exactly the kind of behavior Mom always warned us about," added Cousin Jennifer, not bothering to lower her voice. "She said you'd never learned when to stop." The social isolation was swift and brutal. Margaret had built her identity around being the matriarch of the Thompson family, the woman whose approval everyone sought. But in this moment, she was completely alone, having alienated not just her son, but the entire extended family who had witnessed her cruelty. "I was protecting my son," she said weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. Even she seemed to realize how hollow the words sounded. "By humiliating his bride?" asked family friend Mrs. Patterson, loud enough for everyone to hear. "By trying to ruin their wedding day? That's not protection, Margaret. That's sabotage." Michael stepped forward, still keeping one hand on Ivy's shoulder. His voice was calm, but carried a steel edge I'd never heard before. "Mom, you need to leave. Now! You're no longer welcome at our wedding or in our lives until you can learn to treat my family with respect." "Michael, please," Margaret tried one last time, her voice cracking. "I'm your mother." "And Sarah is my wife, and Ivy is my daughter," he replied firmly. "You just made me choose between you and them. Congratulations, Mom. You lose." Security, two of Michael's groomsmen who worked in law enforcement, quietly approached Margaret's row. She gathered what remained of her dignity, collected her purse, and walked toward the garden exit with her head held high, though I could see her hands shaking. As she reached the back of the seating area, she turned one last time. "You'll regret this, Michael. All of you will." "The only thing I regret," Michael called back, "is that it took me 30 years to find the courage to stand up to you." Margaret left without another word, and with her departure, the entire energy of the garden shifted. What had been tense and horrifying suddenly became triumphant and joyful. Guests were hugging each other, wiping happy tears, and talking excitedly about what they'd just witnessed. "Well," said our officiant with a grin, "that was certainly memorable. Shall we continue with this wedding? I believe we have some vows to finish and a family to officially unite." The rest of the ceremony was magical in a way I'd never imagined possible. Michael's remaining family members went out of their way to show support. His Uncle Robert gave me a thumbs up, Aunt Linda blew kisses, and several cousins were openly crying happy tears. When Michael and I finally kissed as husband and wife, the cheers were deafening. But the moment that broke me completely was when Ivy ran up to us and Michael scooped her into a three-way hug. "Did I do good, Daddy?" she whispered. "You did perfect, sweetheart," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You were the bravest person here today." The reception that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Margaret's absence, rather than casting a shadow over the celebration, seemed to free everyone to genuinely enjoy themselves. Without her disapproving presence, the Thompson family relaxed completely. Ivy became the unofficial star of the party. Guests kept approaching her, praising her courage and poise. "That little girl has more backbone than most adults," I heard someone say. Another guest told her she was a real-life superhero, which made her giggle and pose with her hands on her hips. During the father-daughter dance, Michael chose to dance with Ivy first, before his traditional dance with me. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the DJ, "the groom would like to dance with his daughter." The emphasis on his daughter wasn't lost on anyone. As they swayed to butterfly kisses, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Ivy looked so tiny in Michael's arms, but also so secure, so protected, so loved. "She's really yours now, isn't she?" asked my sister Emma, appearing beside me with tears in her eyes. "She always was," I replied, watching my husband and daughter together. "He just made it official today." Throughout the evening, guests shared their own stories of blended families, chosen families, and standing up to toxic relatives. Margaret's behavior had apparently struck a nerve with many people who'd experienced similar situations. "My stepfather saved my life," shared Michael's cousin David during his impromptu toast. He chose to love me when my biological father wouldn't. That's what real family looks like, what Michael, Sarah, and Ivy have." Another guest, a family friend named Carol, approached me during dinner. "I've known Margaret for 20 years, she said quietly. "What happened today was a long time coming. She's always been controlling, but this was beyond the pale. You and that beautiful little girl of yours deserve so much better." The overwhelming support was healing in a way I hadn't expected. For months, I'd been second-guessing myself, wondering if Margaret's criticisms had any validity. Was I too much baggage? Was I being selfish by wanting Michael to choose us over his mother's approval? But seeing the genuine joy and celebration from everyone else made me realize that Margaret was the one with the problem, not us. As the evening wound down, Michael pulled me aside for a private moment. "I'm sorry," he said, his hands framing my face. "I'm so sorry she tried to ruin our day." "She didn't ruin anything," I assured him. "If anything, she made it more meaningful. You protected us, Michael. You planned for this, prepared Ivy, and made sure we'd be okay no matter what she did. That's what a real husband and father does." "I just wish it hadn't been necessary." "But it was necessary," I said, thinking of all the times Margaret had made subtle digs, all the moments she'd made Ivy feel unwelcome, all the stress she'd caused our relationship. And now we know exactly where we stand. No more walking on eggshells, no more trying to win her approval. We're free. 3 weeks after the wedding, Michael and I sat down to establish clear boundaries for any future contact with Margaret. We drafted a letter explaining that she was welcome to be part of our lives under specific conditions. She would need to undergo family therapy, issue a sincere public apology for her wedding behavior, and demonstrate consistent, respectful treatment of both Ivy and me for a minimum of 6 months before any family gatherings would be considered. "Do you think she'll do it?" I asked as Michael sealed the letter. "Honestly? No," he replied. "Mom's never been wrong about anything in her life, at least in her own mind. The idea of therapy or admitting she was wrong, it's not in her DNA." He was right. Margaret's response came a week later. Not a letter, but a voicemail left on Michael's phone at 2 a.m. "I see you've chosen to side with outsiders over your own blood." Her voice was cold and bitter. "Don't expect me to come crawling back when that marriage falls apart and you realize what you've lost." Michael deleted the voicemail without playing it for me, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. Despite everything, he'd lost his mother, and that grief was real and valid. "I don't regret the choice," he told me that night as we lay in bed. "But I do grieve what we could have had if she'd been different." "That's okay," I assured him. "It's healthy to grieve what never was, but we can't sacrifice what we have for what might have been." The formal adoption process for Ivy began a month after the wedding. Sitting in the lawyer's office, watching Ivy carefully sign Ivy Martinez Thompson on the documents, I felt a completeness I'd never experienced before. David, her biological father, had signed away his parental rights without contest. Apparently, his new wife didn't want the complication of a stepdaughter. "Congratulations," said our lawyer, stamping the final document. "It's official. You're legally a family now." "We were already a family," Ivy said matter-of-factly. "This just makes it so nobody can argue about it anymore." Out of the mouths of babes. 6 months after our wedding, we received an unexpected letter from Margaret. Not an apology, we'd learned not to expect that, but a stiff, formal note announcing that she was moving to Florida to live near her sister. "I've decided to start fresh somewhere new," she wrote. "I wish you all the best in your life choices." It felt like closure, though not the kind any of us had hoped for. Margaret would rather relocate her entire life than admit she'd been wrong or work to rebuild the relationship with her son. "Are you sad?" I asked Michael after he'd read the letter. "I'm sad for the grandmother Ivy will never have," he said thoughtfully. "I'm sad for the relationship we could have had. But I'm not sad about our choice to protect our family. Some people are too toxic to keep in your life, even if they're blood relatives." That evening, we had a family meeting with Ivy to explain that Grandma Margaret was moving away and wouldn't be part of our lives anymore. "Is it because of what I read at the wedding?" Ivy asked, her 8-year-old mind still processing the complex adult emotions she'd witnessed. "No, sweetheart," Michael assured her. "It's because Grandma Margaret made choices that hurt our family, and when people hurt us repeatedly, we have to protect ourselves by creating distance. Like when Tommy at school was mean to me and you taught me to walk away?" Exactly like that. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's taking care of yourself. Ivy nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Well, I have Grandma Martinez and Grandpa Martinez, and they love me lots. And Uncle Robert said I could call him Uncle Bobby, and Aunt Linda sends me cards. So I still have family." She was right. In losing Margaret, we'd gained a deeper appreciation for the family members who truly supported us. Michael's extended family had rallied around us after the wedding, making sure Ivy felt welcomed and loved. My parents had embraced Michael completely, and my sister Emma had appointed herself as Ivy's fun aunt, who taught her inappropriate songs and let her stay up too late. A year after our wedding, we found ourselves planning Ivy's 9th birthday party. As we addressed invitations, I realized that not one person on our guest list was someone who'd made us feel small, unwelcome, or conditional in their love. "Look at this," I told Michael, showing him the invitation list. "Everyone here celebrates us, supports us, chooses us every day. Margaret may have thought she was punishing us by leaving, but she actually gave us the greatest gift, freedom to build the family we wanted without interference." The birthday party was perfect. Chaotic and loud and full of people who genuinely loved each other. Watching Ivy blow out her candles, surrounded by chosen family who'd showed up not out of obligation but out of joy, I felt profound gratitude for the path that had led us here. That night, as we tucked Ivy into bed, she looked up at us with those wise 8-year-old eyes and said, "Daddy Mike, do you miss Grandma Margaret?" Michael considered the question carefully. "I miss the grandmother I hoped she could be for you, but I don't miss feeling like I had to choose between making her happy and making my family happy. Now I just get to focus on making my family happy." "Good," Ivy said decisively, "because we're pretty awesome, and anyone who can't see that is silly." 2 years later, as I write this story, we're still a family of 3, plus an ever-expanding circle of chosen relatives and friends. Michael legally adopted Ivy, who now goes by Ivy Thompson and has never looked back. We get Christmas cards from Margaret's address in Florida, but they're addressed only to Michael, a passive-aggressive reminder that she still doesn't acknowledge Ivy and me as family. We don't send cards back. The letter that Ivy read at our wedding is framed in our hallway now, a reminder of the day an 8-year-old girl taught a room full of adults what courage looks like. Visitors often ask about it, and we tell them the story of how our family was born not just from love, but from the willingness to protect that love against anyone who would try to diminish it. Sometimes people ask if we have any regrets about how things ended with Margaret. The answer is always the same. We regret that she made the choices she did, but we don't regret the choices we made in response. You can't build a healthy family on a foundation of appeasing unhealthy people. Our wedding day taught us that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about showing up for each other, protecting each other, and choosing each other every single day. Margaret showed us what family isn't. Everyone else showed us what family is. And in the end, that made all the difference.